spending in the midst of a recession, you won't have the resources you need to provide unemployment, food stamps, and the things which save families when they're out of work or making very little money. I ask consent that Mr. Greenstein's statement be made part of the record. Order. And, Mr. President, the other testimony that I thought was extremely compelling came from Alan Morrison. Alan Morrison is an accomplished attorney and has argued many cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. He's the Lerner Family Associate Dean for Public Interest and Public Service at the George Washington University Law School. Mr. Morrison really asked us to think through what we were doing. In fact, he asked us the most important question: if you put an amendment in the Constitution which requires a balanced budget, who will enforce it? Who will make it work? Who will decide if you have lived up to its terms? He concluded, based on his background in constitutional law, arguing before the Supreme Court, that not the President. The President's not in that position to do it. The President, of course, with his budget, has his own favorites when it comes to spending and revenue. He said this case ultimately has to find its way to our court system. But he made it clear that any constitutional balanced budget amendment must expressly give to the federal courts the standing to decide the question. He raised a question that without that express language, he really was doubtful that the courts would take it up. They might view it as just a political question to be resolved by Congress itself. Now, Senator Lee, who spoke on the floor earlier, has a version of the balanced budget amendment which expressly gives standing to members of Congress and others, if I'm not mistaken. But the point made by Professor Morrison is any balanced budget amendment has to expressly give to our federal court system the power of judicial review. In other words, who is going to call the fouls, the balls and the strikes and the outs? It's going to have to be the court system when it comes to whether the balanced budget amendment is being complied with. That's the first question, but certainly not the last question. Professor Morrison then went on to say, now put this in the real world where Congress has passed a budget, appropriations bills, and now someone is arguing that what Congress did does not comply with the new provision in the Constitution requiring a balanced budget, arguing that, in fact, Congress is overspending the amount that it's allowed to spend, for example. Then, of course, that case has to find its way from the Capitol building to the President who has signed the bill and then over to the court system. Keep in mind, while we are in doubt about the outcome on appropriations bills and the budget, there's a serious question about how we will continue to fund our government, whether we can continue to make important payments to military retirees, Social Security recipients, Medicare recipients. All of it is in doubt while there is a question raised as to whether or not the budget passed by the Congress is unconstitutional. This is the thicket that we're being led into by those who very glibly say all we need to do is mandate in the Constitution a balanced budget and it will just flow naturally from that mandate. Well, listen to what Professor Morrison said. The federal courts will rightly be extremely reluctant to wade into these budget battles and thus will want to be sure there's likely to be a violation before agreeing to decide it on its merits. But budgets are inherently uncertain in their impact, depending on factors such as whether revenue targets are met, whether the demand for entitlements is higher or lower than anticipated, whether discretionary spending is fully realized, whether an existing war winds down or a new one starts, each one with great uncertainties accompanying them. Thus, it will be far from clear on October 1st of a given fiscal year whether a duly enacted budget will or will not be in balance, assuming that the question is reasonably close and is likely to be in at least some years. Unless Congress makes it clear, either in the constitutional amendment or perhaps by subsequent legislation, that the courts should resolve all doubts in favor of finding claims ripe, the courts are likely to be reluctant to reach the merits even for those persons who were expressly given standing in the amendment. And then, of course, is the question of a remedy. What if Congress passes a budget and appropriation bills, the President signs them, and they're challenged in court, and the court says, yes, in fact, Congress has overspent beyond the requirements of the Constitution. What's next? What remedy would the courts order? What can the court do? Can it order the recipients of salaries, Social Security benefits, Medicare payments, payments under government contracts to pay back a certain percentage? Can it order Congress to rectify the balance in next year's budget, which would certainly trigger a new lawsuit? To be sure, the court will not dismiss as moot claims that are capable of repetition, yet evade review because the duration of the violation is so limited the courts cannot decide its legality before it's ceased. Professor Morrison asked us to get beyond the bumper stickers and to think twice before we amend our Constitution. Madam President, in over 200 years since the enactment of the Bill of Rights, we have amended this Constitution precious few times. We have done it for compelling national reasons. We have done it to extend the right to vote to women. We have done it to make it clear that African Americans treated as slaves will be treated as citizens in the United States. We have done it to deal with questions of presidential disability and succession. These are things which were compelling, major national issues which could be resolved in a clear, definitive way by our Congress working with the states for ratification. Now comes the flavor of the day. In the midst of the deficit crisis debate, there are those who are arguing we shouldn't accept our responsibility in the Senate and House to balance the budget. No, we should just put in the Constitution that we're required to do it. And then they go further. If we're going to address it, they say, we're going to draw certain lines that future Congresses forever, as long as this constitutional amendment applies, will be bound by, to make it more difficult to raise taxes on anyone in the United States, to make it imperative, if not mandatory, that cuts be made in programs like Social Security and Medicare. These are questions that should be decided by Congress and the President on a timely basis. I've been involved in the past 2 years with a lot of debate about our national budget deficit, both on the Bowles-Simpson Commission and with the voluntary effort by 6 Democratic Republican senators. It's not easy. It's very hard. But it can be done if the political will is there. I think we need to summon the courage, political courage, and the will to do it. But we should summarily reject these efforts to amend our Constitution. They are not well thought out. The Constitution is too important a document, an historical guidepost for our nation and an inspiration for nations around the world, to put in a fatally flawed constitutional balanced budget amendment in the heat of the moment. This is a significant vote. Those of us, and that includes every single member of the Senate, who have sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution, need to take that document very, very seriously. Those who want to amend it in quick fashion, changing their amendment language by the day, should be dismissed. If they do not show the reverence for this document that it deserves, if they don't take the time to make certain that their proposals are consistent with the sanctity and importance of this document, they should not be taken seriously. I don't believe any of my colleagues can go home, having voted for that amendment, and expect wild applause from audiences across America. They will understand that this was just a political reaction to a very important issue. Let us not amend the Constitution with a balanced budget amendment. Madam President, I'd like to make one brief remark. I see the senator from Ohio here. Be placed as a separate part of the record with consent of the chair.
Without objection.
Madam President, the holiday season is upon us, and a lot of us are thinking about our families, and we're thinking about being with them as quickly as we can. It's a time of year when has a special significance for so many of us. But what was made clear by President Obama yesterday, and my colleagues should take note of, we're not going home for Christmas, Hanukkah, or any holiday season until we've done our job for the people of this country. Millions of people in Illinois and across America are counting on Congress to extend the payroll tax cut. What does it mean in my state? Average income of $50,000 a year. It's worth more than $1,000 a year to those families. It's worth about $125 to $150 a month to have a payroll tax cut, money that working families struggling from paycheck to paycheck desperately need to fill the gas tank, to pay the utility bills, to provide clothing for the kids, to make sure you can stay in your home. These are the basics. No member of Congress is going to be allowed to go home and ignore the imposition of such a new payroll tax on America. President Obama met with the Democratic leaders of the Senate yesterday, and he said point blank, he's told the First Lady Michelle and his girls that if necessary, they can have their Christmas vacation in Hawaii, which they go to each year, by themselves, and he will wait here until this job is done. I hope that doesn't happen for his family or for the sake of any family of any member of Congress. But in order to avoid that, we have to do the right and responsible thing. This afternoon there'll be a vote. The payroll tax cut offered by Senator Casey of Pennsylvania. It's a payroll tax cut which would help millions of America's working families have more to spend and help the economy to recover. And he pays for it. He doesn't add to the deficit. He pays for it by imposing a surtax, and listen closely, the second $1 million earned by a person in a year. Not the first million. You don't pay a penny on the first $1 million you earn. On the second $1 million, you'll pay a surtax. I think it's 2%, maybe less. The Republicans have said absolutely unacceptable. We will not allow you to impose this onerous tax on these people. People who are already making $20,000 a week, we can't ask them to pay 2% more on the next dollar they make? I don't think it's unreasonable. And if it leads to a payroll tax cut that helps families across this country, if the economy continues to recover even at a faster pace, if we see more business activity and business life and more people working, you know what's going to happen? Those same wealthy people will prosper again, as they always do. It's in their best interest for this economy to get well. And for our Republican friends to fold their arms and say, we're just not going to let you touch the wealthiest people in America, is an irresponsible position. Senator Casey has led this effort. It's the second effort we've made. We had one last week. The Republicans offered their alternative last week. It had 20 votes on the floor of the Senate. 20. Out of 43 Republican senators, 20 voted for it. They want to bring it up again today. They'll probably get more than 20 votes this time, but it's pretty clear that the Republican senators are half-hearted in their support of this Republican alternative. One Republican senator from Maine had the courage to step across the aisle last week and join us. We salute Senator Collins for doing that. We hope others will do it today. We can bring this challenge to a close the right way by extending the payroll tax cut, paying for it with a tax on the wealthiest people in America. We can do our job and go home and be with our families. If Republicans won't come to the table to work with us on a reasonable compromise, I'm afraid the American people will know very clearly who's to blame for cutting the payroll tax on work, or I should say, continuing a tax on working families across America. The facts are that we want working Americans to have a good year, get through a difficult time, and the economy to recover. We should be doing this on a bipartisan basis. And what the President has said is, you know, roll out your Christmas trees and blankets here in the Senate because you're going to stay here even through the holidays if necessary. We are not going to go home to celebrate until we can celebrate with American families who are counting on us across America. Madam President, I yield the floor.
President.
The senator from Ohio.
I go home every weekend back to northeast Ohio, where I live, in a town called Avon in Lorain County, and I want to go home at Christmas, and I want to be with my 3-year-old grandson and my three daughters and son, but I also think our obligation, as Senator Durbin said, as the Assistant Majority Leader, is to stay here and get our work done. And get our work done means extend this payroll tax cut and extend unemployment benefits. If we don't do that, frankly, ruining the holiday season for tens of thousands tens and dozens of tens of thousands, if you will, Ohioans and Illinoisans and North Carolinians. If we don't do that, we don't deserve to be able to go home and be with our families. I mean, I'm not trying to be a martyr here, but I just think it's shameful if a group of people, in order to protect the highest income taxpayers in this country, those making over $1 million a year, continue to block an extension, continuation, if you will, of this tax cut for working families. In my state, the average tax cut that we will vote for today and continue until it happens is about $100, $110, $120 per family per month. And it's absolutely unconscionable not to do that. Now, Senator Durbin also talked about the constitutional amendment to balance the budget. And I want to recount something I heard earlier today on the Senate floor. Two of my conservative colleagues from Kentucky, one from Utah, spoke about the importance of balanced budget amendment. I've supported balanced budget amendments in the past when I was in the House of Representatives. I've actually voted. It was part of an effort to get us to a balanced budget in reality in the 1990s. So when President Bush took office, we had the largest budget surplus. We balanced the budget and then some, had the largest budget surplus in American history. I was part of that. I was proud of that. We accomplished what we set out to do. We accomplished what we said we would, and we accomplished, I think, something very important for our country. It was then, in the first years of the last decade, in 2001, 2, and 3, that we went to war and two wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, didn't pay for them. The President Bush in those days pushed through two tax cuts, one in 2001, one in 2003, that went overwhelmingly to the wealthiest Americans without paying for it, without offset cuts or other taxes. And then President Bush also pushed through in a very, very close middle-of-the-night vote in the House of Representatives by, I believe, 1 vote or 2 votes, a Medicare privatization bill that basically was a bailout for the drug companies and the insurance companies and didn't pay for that. That's why we got to this situation, unfortunately, where we've had this terrible budget problem. Now, but what I wanted to address, Madam President, is what the solution of a couple of my colleagues seems to be. And to their minds, there seemed to be a sort of a moral equivalence of on the one hand, protecting, or on the one hand, asking millionaires, people making $1 million and up, to pay their fair share, and making Medicare beneficiaries, and Social Security beneficiaries taking big cuts. So, so I heard my two colleagues basically say this, that if the Democrats were serious about moving towards a balanced budget, and again, 15 years ago we did it. We absolutely did it with President Clinton, got to a balanced budget, got to a surplus. And they said if the Democrats are serious about that, they'll raise the retirement age for Social Security and they'll raise the eligibility age for Medicare. Let me tell you why that's a bad thing, Madam President. I was in Youngstown not too long ago, and at a town hall meeting, and a 63-year-old woman stood up and said, 62, 63 years old, she said, she said, I just need to stay healthy and stay alive until I'm 65 so I have health insurance. I need to be able to stay alive for another couple of years so I can get on Medicare and have health insurance. Imagine living your life that way when you're thinking, you know, I just got to stay alive until I'm 65, then I'll have good government, Medicare, health insurance. And so some people here are saying, well, tough luck. We're going to have to raise the eligibility age to Medicare to 66, to 67, to 68, whatever my very conservative colleagues are proposing from Utah and from Kentucky, raise the eligibility age for Medicare as if that's going to make them better. And, you know, when you think about it, I want 62-year-olds, it's one reason we passed the health care bill, I want 62-year-olds to have health insurance. One, it's good for them. Second, it's way better for the country, including taxpayers, that they get health care before they get sicker and sicker and sicker and end up in an emergency room or end up with cobbled together health care that's much more expensive, let alone what it does to this lady and her family. Second thing they proposed is to raise the eligibility age for Social Security. Now, it's easy for people around here, Madam President, that dress like this, that for all intents and purposes talk for a living and work hard at what we do, but talk for a living and work in offices and, you know, don't do heavy lifting and aren't exposed to the elements and all that. It's easy for us to say, let's raise the Social Security age to 70 because, you know, God willing, we'll still be here if the voters vote us in, and we can keep doing this, and most of us are pretty healthy and don't work around asbestos and aren't doing heavy lifting and aren't working in the snow and the rain and in the heat. Well, you know, when I think about raising the retirement age for 70, here's who I think about. I think about construction workers, and I think about women that cut hair, and I think about somebody that works a waitress that works in a diner, or I think about somebody that works at a factory in Brunswick, Ohio, and I think about people that walk the floors in retail. And we're going to tell them, we who dress like this, we who have jobs like this, are going to tell those constituents, and there are millions in my state and tens and tens and tens of millions around the country, working class citizens of this country that simply can't work till they're 70. If you're cutting hair, if you're changing sheets in a hotel, and cleaning out bathrooms in a hotel, if you're working as a carpenter or a laborer or a sheet metal worker, if you're working as an auto worker or a steel worker or a non-union in a tool and die or a machine shop, you probably can't work till you're 70. Your body probably just won't be able to function in the workplace with the demands, with the physical demands and mental demands too now, to work in the workplace until 70. Yet people here think it's okay to do that. The people here, I would add, Madam President, can retire if they had 20 or 25 years in the House and Senate, can retire at 60 or 62 or whatever and get a full pension. That's why I've introduced legislation, not opposed to their balanced budget amendment. I think it's got all kinds of mechanisms in it that lock in low tax rates for the richest people in this country. I won't get into that. Senator Durbin talked about that. But I've introduced legislation that simply says if we raise the retirement age to 70, then members of Congress can't retire until 70. They can't retire with a pension until 70. Why should members of Congress be able to get a pension at 62 or 58 if they've served enough years, but a Social Security beneficiary shouldn't until a decade or so later? So, Madam President, it's important as we talk about balancing the budget, as we talk about our fiscal situation, not to make a moral equivalence between the richest 1% in this country paying their fair share in taxes, making that a moral equivalence to Social Security and Medicare beneficiaries having to endure significant cuts. And when some people around here call it Medicare and Social Security entitlements. That's the way they can be really dismissive. We've got to fix entitlements. Well, you talk to people, you talk to a 72-year-old in Dayton or a 68-year-old in Zanesville or an 81-year-old woman in Xenia or Springfield, Ohio, and they will tell you oftentimes this isn't really an entitlement. This is an investment. I paid into Social Security. I paid into Medicare. I'm deserving of I want to make sure the government fulfills the covenant that we made over the last 75 years in the case of Social Security, 45 years in the case of Medicare, the covenant we made between our government and the citizens of this country. That's the importance of that, and we need to think twice. That's why my legislation was introduced in part, that congressmen and women can't receive a pension before the same retirement age as Social Security beneficiaries. We need to think twice before we're going to tell a carpenter or a barber or a retail worker or a steel worker that we're going to raise the retirement age to 70 and make them work until 70 so they can receive Social Security benefits. Madam President, I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Without objection.
I'm coming to the floor now because we won't have an opportunity to debate on the payroll tax cut because the votes are going to be at 2:30 and that time is taken. I think it's really important for the American public to look at what's happening in Washington right now. There's not a disagreement in Washington about whether or not we want people to continue to receive this tax cut. The disagreement is, should it come out of Social Security? Should we continue to undermine Social Security, or should we do it a different way? That's number one. And number two is, if we're going to borrow $117 billion against our children, knowing that we have significant waste, fraud, abuse, and duplication in the federal government of in excess of $350 billion a year, should we not eliminate some of that to pay for this rather than borrow the money? And so we have the posturing between the two parties based on the election that's coming to create a predicate that some people only care for the rich and some people only care for those that are less fortunate, which is all smoke and mirrors. There's unanimity that we want this to continue. And so what the American people aren't hearing is the real debate. The real debate is, should we eliminate some of the waste, some of the stupidity, some of the duplication in the federal government, and actually do that to be able to pay for this, so that as we do this thing that we all want to do, in other words, keep this $1,000 to $2,000 per family in the economy now, that we don't do that by crippling the children of the very people that are in the economy. It's a zero-sum game. Somebody's going to pay the bill sometime. And if it's us that refuse to do the hard work of ferreting out waste, duplication, fraud, then our service will have been in vain. Because what we're really doing is transferring the responsibility for us today to our children. And actually it's going to come double-fold, because the way this bill is lined out is we're going to borrow the money in the market to pay for this continued decrease in Social Security taxes. We've already stolen $2.6 trillion from Social Security. Congresses have the last 20 years. And when we borrow that money and put it back in, there's no reduction in what's owed. So our kids are going to actually get to pay for it twice. They're going to pay for it now with the new debt we're taking, and the fact that that new payment wasn't recognized as a reduction in that, they're going to get to pay it again. So it's really going to cost our children $250 billion. The lack of honesty in talking plainly with the American people, they know we're in trouble. The question is will we be honest with them, treat them as adults in terms of how we go about solving the problems? And you hear the mess, the press takes advantage of that. There's not a lot of difference between the senator from Ohio who just spoke in terms of what we want to do in terms of protecting seniors. But the politics around it and the game playing poorly serves our country. So for all the press that's watching, we're going to get this done. I know it's the game blood sport that's happening right now with the politician saying will it or it won't. I mean, the press saying will it or won't. It's going to happen. And we're going to fix the unemployment so that we have a continuation of that. And the real question is will we fix the real things that the country needs fixed, or are we just going to kick the can down the road? And what we're doing is kicking the can down the road, because we won't make the tough choices to pay for it. We won't pay for the unemployment benefits. The first 26 weeks is what's earned. That's what people contribute to. We're up to 99 weeks. That comes directly from the American taxpayer, but it doesn't come from the American taxpayer. It actually comes from the future American taxpayers. So some real questions ought to be asked. What's the game being played in Washington by both sides? Trying to get an advantage in the next election as our country drowns in debt, we continue to further mortgage our children's future, and we continue to treat the American people like children rather than the adults they are. Everybody knows everyone's going to have to sacrifice. Everyone. Does that mean we're going to abandon the social safety net? Absolutely not. Does that mean the 62-year-old individual that's trying to get on Medicare is not going to get there? No, they are. So the tactics of fear that something's not going to be there, as a conservative, fiscal conservative, constitutional conservative, I want us to fulfill our obligation both to the promises that we've made, but to our ultimate oath that we came here, which is the Constitution. You know, Thomas Jefferson said you should never borrow money for which you have not laid a tax to pay for it. I mean, that's the founder, one of the founders of our country. We would do well to go back and visit the wise and prudent advice of our founders. And you just don't see that or hear that much anymore in the United States Congress. And so these are big problems our country is facing. I'm 63 years old, soon to be 64. We have never faced anything close to what we are facing today. And how we react and how we respond is going to make all the difference in the world, not for our short-term future, but also for our long-term future. So I hope the American people that are listening right now understand we're going to do what is necessary to help get the economic process of our country running again in a better and viable way. And I hope you will dismiss the partisan rhetoric, the class warfare rhetoric that we hear all too commonplace today. And if we'll focus on what the problem is rather than the next election, what we'll see is we'll have a greater deal of success in coming together and forging solutions that the American people can be proud of and actually move our country ahead. With that, I notice the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
And Madam President, first I just want to make one comment on the Cordray appointment that was attempted a little bit ago. Then I want to just bring up some more good news on the economy and the economic front of the economy of the United States. But first, I was somewhat disappointed the vote, 53-45, only garnering one Republican from the other side, only one. And on an important agency that ensures the protection of consumers in a variety of areas. And it just seems illogical to me that we would not find compromise and ability to appoint someone to run an agency that this body in a 60-vote margin approved to help protect consumers for what happened over the last several years and glaring problems and challenges that consumers had to ensure that the financial institutions of this country, as well as other financial folks like pawn shops and payroll check cashers and all of them have firm regulation consumer opportunity to respond to those that get abused by those programs. And so I'm a little disappointed. I wasn't intending to come down here to speak on that issue, but I wanted to come down just to kind of put my voice on the floor that I was disappointed that appointment could not happen, which I believe was just raw politics. It had nothing to do with the ability to make this agency run properly or not. They just didn't want to appoint him because they don't like the agency, the 45 or so that didn't vote for this. And I think it all boils down to one very simple thing, that the consumers are now once again left without someone running an agency that will help protect consumers against these people who prey on individuals in the financial arena. So again, Madam President, I'm somewhat disappointed. But let me go to the real reason I came down here. And I came down yesterday and I had a lot to say about the economy and where we are and the headlines that I reported on yesterday and just to read them again just to make sure, because just in less than 48 hours, 72 hours, more good news headlines. This was the headlines I talked about yesterday. Jobless rate dips to lowest level in more than 2 years, New York Times. CNN, Dow closes at the largest gain since March 2009. Private sector jobs soar. Payroll forecasts rise. And that is Reuters. The Wall Street Journal, online sales reach record $1.25 billion on Cyber Monday. On top of that, we had record sales for Thanksgiving weekend, Black Friday they call it, and Small Business Saturday. Again, incredible impact to our economy. What this tells me, even though, we get a lot of criticism from the other side and others who complain that maybe we're not doing our job and frustrated that Washington isn't working as well as it could, and I agree. There's a lot of areas of ability that we're not exercising. A good example, again, is that appointment I mentioned a little bit ago. We were unable to move forward. But many of the policies over the last 3 years, as we work through this great recession, we have fought kind of a lonely war to get these policies in place. And once again, more good news. And let me just read off a couple of them. This week's Time magazine has a whole article, How America Started Selling Cars Again. Why is this important? Because this is a manufacturing base for our country. It employs not only jobs in the automobile industry, but it trickles all the way through the economy of the country. It doesn't matter if they're at a port. For example, I remember a meeting recently with the folks from the Detroit Port Authority talking about shipments and movement of product from the automobile industry across this country, but also manufacturing and other activities throughout the country that support the automobile industry. It's moving forward. It's growing. We took a dramatic step, got a lot of criticism for it. Matter of fact, no one wants to even mention the words because everyone's so nervous about it, but some call it the auto bailout, and yes, we did do that. Net result is healthy, strong, profitable industry, bringing jobs to America, creating jobs in America. Matter of fact, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal not long ago talking about how we're importing jobs from Japan and China back to the United States, to the automobile industry, because it is successful. And oh, by the way, they're paying back all those loans they got from the federal government with interest, taxpayers getting their money back in full. Net result, we helped at the right time to ensure that we are still a player in the automobile industry, not only in this country, but in this world market. And the net result is we're bringing jobs back to the United States, to this industry. So those that continue to complain and want to demonize that action also cash for clunkers. Another program that barely passed, again, many of us on this side of the aisle took that lonely road because we thought it was the right thing to help move this economy forward. Again, the net result is this industry is profiting more than the last several years. They're producing more jobs, not only in their industry directly, but indirectly. And the naysayers on the other side rarely bring this up anymore, because in less than 3 years, really less than 2 years, this industry has turned itself around because of American ingenuity and help and support from the United States government, but also all that help and support being paid back with interest in the good old American way. So from my perspective, once again, great story. I commend Time Magazine for talking about the future. Let me also tell you another one. This is on CSNBC. I pulled this off. I like looking at all the business magazines and websites every morning. I try to glance through them very quickly to see what's happening, what the markets are doing, what the industry is doing, who's investing, who's being new entrepreneurial or has new businesses, what's happening out there. Here's this one. U.S. mortgage applications jumped last week. This is the industry that really fell apart in the beginning of the Great Recession, the housing industry. A lot of people say that was the main reason the economy collapsed. It was a significant portion of it, no question about it. But let me read you this. The Mortgage Bankers Association said in its seasonally adjusted index of mortgage application activity, which includes both refinancing and home purchases, spiked 12.8% in the week of December 2nd. The Mortgage Bankers Association seasonally adjusted index of refinancing applications also jumped to 15.3. I'm so used to the old numbers when things weren't going so well. 15.3%. While the gauge on loan requests, those are people who are now saying, I'd like to think about buying a home. I want to purchase today. I want to start examining what's out there. Home purchase requests up 8.3%. Here's what the Mortgage Bankers Vice President said of Research and Economics. His words, applications increased significantly as mortgage rates dropped to their lowest levels in about 2 months. Actually, overall, lowest levels in decades, but we now measure things by eighth of a point, and when you're at 4.125 or 4.25, we're now measuring which is lower. Overall, it's lower for the last several decades, but incredible. Let me read you another one. This is from Politico, but it's reporting on what Bloomberg, in their Bloomberg's global poll, which they started doing in 2009, kind of to see where foreign investors will put their money. Where will they invest? Where will they take the dollars that they have accumulated or will gather through investors and shareholders and so forth? Where are they going to put their money? More than 41% said they expect the U.S., United States, will have one of the strongest performing economies in the world in the coming year. The highest percentage the country has seen since they started doing this report. Another one today, again, MSNBC. Jobless claims And let me repeat that. Jobless claims dropped to 9-month low. Jobless claims dropped 23,000 to an adjusted 381,000. Actually, below the magical threshold of 400,000, which people watch. Will it be consistently under 400,000? We've actually received more of these under 400,000 recently than the last 3 years. That's a good signal that the economy is moving. I know some will say it's not enough. Well, you know, when I came here, 500,000 people were losing their jobs every single month. They were losing their jobs. So we have now had 21 consecutive months of job growth in the private sector. That is a great statement for us as an economy. 21 consecutive months of job growth. That's an indication that our economy is moving. Do we want it to move faster? Of course we do. That's what America's about. We want to see things happen right now, today. But this is a great recession. We are pulling ourselves out of it. It takes time and it takes good policy. And yes, it takes some opportunity to take a little risk. And we did some of those here. We made some decisions that were tough, not necessarily very popular at times. I can remember many of the calls that I've gotten on some of these issues. But what's the end result? That's what we have to measure by. Leadership is not about waiting for a poll to tell us what's right or what's wrong, or waiting for someone to say, here's the right move because your constituency will vote for you if you do this thing this way. It's about leadership. Sometimes the leadership role is tough. It means getting a few trucks running over you a little bit and some tire tracks on your back. But the end result is what we look for. Today where we are, we have job growth. Not as significant as we want, but job growth. Where were we? 500,000 jobs a month disappearing. Let me give you another one, because this is a big issue that people are concerned about. As a former mayor, managing a city, you're always looking at the revenues, because the revenues tell you how your local economy, or if it's a state revenue, how your state is doing. And if you remember in 09 and 08, end of 08, 09, and beginning of 010, incredible concern about local governments collapsing under the debt and deficit spending and unable to manage. As a matter of fact, the markets were concerned about municipal and state debt and what that might mean. Oddly enough, and I wish I would have brought that article, it hasn't panned out like people thought. That local governments and state governments are doing better than people anticipated. Still tough roads, no question about it. We still have firefighters, police officers, teachers who have been laid off. We tried to pass a bill here to help that out. That didn't happen because too many on the other side opposed it. But local governments, state governments, here's the latest report. State revenue report by the Nelson A. Rockefeller Institute of Government, University of in New York. Overall tax revenues show strong growth in second quarter. State tax revenues grew by 10.8% in the second quarter of 2011. Matter of fact, the year ending in June 2011, which is a lot of fiscal years for state governments and local governments, the period corresponding to 46 states, almost all the states' fiscal years, total state collections increased by $58 billion in that year, an 8.4% from the previous year. The strongest annual gain since 2005. 2005. What does that mean? That means local economies, state governments are starting to recover. Still a rough road, but starting to recover. Good signs. That means there's more economic activity within their communities. It means businesses are replanting, designing their opportunities in those communities. People are buying homes, as I mentioned, which means they're paying property taxes, which means they can hire police and fire and paramedics and teachers. So again, Madam President, I could probably come down here every day and give this kind of good news, because what you always hear, like today, the market's down. I forget what it is, 70, 80 points, maybe 100 today. And people, the headlines will be market crashes or market, dips significantly. Here's the reality. Since 2009, March, the market is up, even with today's activity, 81%. 81%. That means people's my son's 529 account is better today than it was 3 years ago. That's good, because that means my wife and I can afford to make sure he can move on and go to college someday. But that also means retirement accounts have more resources in them today than they did 2.5, 3 years ago. It means that public pension programs that invest in retirement programs, invest in these kind of markets, also are doing better. But again, the headline will be that the sky's falling, and because that's what people like to do. They like to prey on fear rather than opportunity. I think a lot of us on this side believed in the opportunity, the future of this great country 3 years ago, when we sat here and made some tough decisions over the last, really, first 18 months of my term here. Tough decisions. But we believed in what's possible. We believed that this economy will turn around with a little help from the people who live here, work here, and see the future. And we also knew we had to do a little bit. We had to do something extraordinary to create the opportunities for the future of this great country. As I mentioned, private sector job increase, automobile industry better than ever before, home sales doing better than they were 2.5 years ago. The market is up by 80%. All good news. But you don't hear a lot of those as the front page, above the fold, big, bold headlines, because they're not sexy, they're not controversial. But that's what's happening. And if a lot of us around here had more belief in the potential, it'd be incredible what can happen. Let me end on this note, and that is we're in the middle of a debate on continuing tax relief for the folks who are working every day, the people I just talked about, who are buying homes, buying cars, paying taxes. We're saying to them, we want to make sure you continue to receive the dollars in your pocket. In my state, that's $300 million, just in my state, $300 million for the payroll tax deduction that they get to keep for 400,000 Alaskans instead of the IRS taking it. I don't know about you, but I think that's a good thing. Now, I know some will say we have no proof this works. Well, I just gave you proof. I will give you proof every day if necessary. Yes, you can't say this certain industry came back because of this one little item. But I'm going to tell you, you put $300 million in my state into the hands of 400,000 Alaskans, about $1,000 or so, a little over $1,000 per person. The net result is they're going to spend that money in the economy. They're going to buy that car, that wash machine, or go on that vacation. They're going to spend that money in this economy. Yes, there's no fancy report that says this business succeeded because we gave them this special tax break, which we shouldn't do. We gave it to the people of this country, an incredible opportunity to take their money and put it to work. 160 million families will benefit. 160 million families will benefit by this action today. People making $50,000 or less will pull back about $1,000 into their pocket. Again, not in the IRS's pocket, into the consumer's pocket that they will spend. Again, I know, I'll hear from the other side how bad, there's no proof, this may not work. It is working. They can deny it all they want, but I can continue to lay the facts down. And it's not me producing this out of some government document. It's mostly very conservative publications reporting on the good news. I hope, Mr. President, that the folks from the other side, and I know we picked up a Republican when we had this before. This is a modified, compromised version of what didn't pass last week. Say, okay, we're trying to compromise here. We're trying to compromise, but we're keeping it simple and trying to do it in a way that ensures that middle-class Americans, Alaskans that I represent, put more money in their pocket for people who are working every day, making a difference in the economy, not people who just, on the top end of the cycle. And I know that's the great debate, and we differ with many, and I differ with several people on the other side, that I do believe the people who make $1 million or more should pay a little bit more. I don't have any heartburn over that, and it's 235,000 people we're talking about. versus 160 million. That's who I want to put my investment in, because I know those people who are made up of individuals, families, and a significant portion of small business people will continue to build this economy. Matter of fact, the best growth period, the growth pattern right now is small business. They're the ones that are the backbone of this economy. Those people we need to help. That's what this bill does. I hope we find the magical success. I wish we'd have 50 majority votes here like the rest of this world operates under. So for some reason this place has to have special rules to make it complicated and hard for anything to get done. But maybe there'll be some people that join up and want to support the American people and support giving them tax relief and making sure their lives are better, especially at this time of the year when Christmas is around the corner. I'd love to give them a good Christmas gift. I think all of us would. Let's do it. Let's do it today. Let's do it for the American people. Let's do it for my constituency in Alaska, your constituency, Mr. President, all the rest in this room. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'd rest my comments there, but I do have an item from the leadership. Let me read this. I ask consent that any time spent during a quorum call between now and 2:30 p.m. be equally divided.